The following production is intended for entertainment purposes only. We are not legal professionals. We do not speak for any government agency, and the opinions expressed here are our own. Relax.
Jesus.
Wait,
what's going
not
on?
yet.
No.
No, I'm an idiot. I know someone's gonna come home while I'm doing this. Or that can be in there, I don't care. I had to shut my door.
Yeah. What kind of helmet is that behind you?
It was affectionately called an ACH, an Army combat hat, is what it was called in the Army, but every branch has a version of this.
Yeah.
This one happened to come from the Navy.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. This is not the one that was issued to me. This was one that I bought from an Army surplus.
Exactly.
I got this from an Army surplus.
Yeah, I've got some police supplies sort stuff from surplus stores as well.
Yes.
Allegedly.
I happen to find them with Deputy Blackwood.
Yeah.
Still written on it.
If you've got a warrant, then I'll show them to you. But if not, you can get lost.
Yeah.
You can get gone. What you been up to, man?
Oh, nothing. I've had a pretty good day. I mean, it's gonna be a great day. It already is. I've been wrestling with some ideas, and it's been in my life, and it's and also in my mind, if that makes sense. I've been wrestling with it in the physical world and up here.
Okay. What is it?
Yeah. Well, it's something I want to talk about today, and it's both related, but I'm going to pitch it to you as two different things, and I think they're just going to roll right into each other. It's both what do you and I mean whenever we say deconstruction, like whenever we've gone through a deconstruction in theology, and like I think we're both on the other side of that, and what does that mean now? But also I want to know, like, why, because it's not like, I feel like people I've talked to about this have treated it almost like I'm going through a phase. You know what I mean? And so I want to talk about why, and why it's real, and even why I bring that up, but also what you do to get yourself out of the blues.
Oh man, awesome! Yeah. Okay. Both of those are like recent. Well, the deconstruction thing is like constant, but the blues. I've been working on that this week and making some progress, I think.
Oh, really?
Which, by the way, I was thinking about it even this morning. It's funny to me, or maybe interesting to me, that I'm so hesitant to call it depression. I'll call it a funk. I'll call it the blues. I'll call it anything but depression. Which maybe in some cases it's not what I've been dealing with, I think is. But yeah, it's just funny how I just don't like to use that word. Or at least I haven't.
Do think, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's this weird dance, because depression is technically and clinically a mental illness. You know what I mean? You can be diagnosed with depression, which I have been, but it's part of the human condition. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody is going to go through. I like the word melancholy, but we're talking about the same thing, like blues or whatever.
There was I think it was from the 1600s or something. There was a slang I found a while back when somebody's in that state, and they called it the morbs.
The morbs?
The morbs. So sometimes, morbid, I assume because of having morbid thinking, but yeah, that's a term I like to use around my house when someone's feeling down. You got the morbs?
The morbs. I've never heard that one. There's a biography of David Crockett and he was talking about
Did you say Davy or David?
it's the same thing.
I'm curious. What did you say?
I said David.
Okay.
No,
So then
because I started with
so-
Davy and
okay.
played it safe and put a D on there.
David Crockett
David.
is the Hispanic one. I thought you said
You'd
David
think.
Crockett, and I was going to be like, "Dang, man,
David is actually
that's what his
Jewish.
teachers called him, David."
Yeah. David
Yeah,
is
well,
actually
that would make
Jewish.
sense.
They both
Yeah.
got tans, so I see how you confused it. No.
Anyway,
David Crockett, there's a biography about him that I listened to, the Audible book, and I listened to some podcasts about this particular biography, but it uses pieces from his own journal that like his grandkids gave the author of this biography of David Crockett, and he writes about his melancholy, and he calls it melancholy, but he had a depressing life. What all of the lives back then were just hard scrabble, but he lost.
I mean, he killed a bar when he was 3.
Yeah, that's true. He watched his daughter and their group of friends get kidnapped. Like he was actively chasing after the Indians that had his daughter and their friends with them, and the allegations were that they were assaulted by their kidnappers. He went and rescued them and wrote about it in his journal, like in bloody detail. Like you can tell it stuck with him. The detail of the fight that led to the rescue of his daughters. And a time later, he watched an Indian kill his son, and him and his son were hiding from these band of Indians. So like his son was a late teenage male, I think 16 or 17, and they were hiding in these reeds from these Indians that were after him. And they found his son and like stabbed him, and he made himself stay silent so they wouldn't kill him too, and writes about this in his journal. And then years later, he's writing about it, reflecting on this in his journal. He's like, I'm just overcome with this melancholy that I cannot shake. Like it was obviously he had these traumatic events that led to it, but depression is just part of the human experience.
Yeah.
That's where I started picking up the word melancholy.
Yeah, I think that's a good term for it too. The morbs is more fun, but the reality is that at least I think for the reasons that I hesitate to call it depression, I think that I just need to get over the stigma of it, you know. And I think a lot of it, most of it probably comes from my childhood, comes from my religious background, but I think a lot of it also comes from the law enforcement background, where up until, I mean, it was probably a couple of years before I left in 21, so maybe about 2019 is the first time that I ever gave it any kind of serious mental health, that is, that I ever gave it any kind of serious consideration. But also that was about when they started talking about it in, at least around here in law enforcement, was that, you gotta take care of your mental health, and you can't just drink whiskey to make it go away.
Man, me and you both have stories for days, but in 2020, they had just passed. It didn't take effect until 2021, but the state of Kansas had just recognized PTSD as a mental illness in 2021. Or in 2020 is when they voted on it and recognized PTSD as a mental illness, which allowed law enforcement officers in 2021 to be able to have that illness be recognized by the state, which is, it doesn't take a big leap of reason to see how law enforcement officers are exposed to traumatic events, you know?
And even, I mean, so I think that within probably, if you're an active, at least street cop, at the very least street cop, I would say within the first 3 years, maybe within the first year, you're going to encounter something that could produce PTSD. But if you let's say you're not active, maybe you're in an office or something like that. I think there's a lot of secondhand PTSD too.
Yeah.
Just because you may not have been on that call, but when the shift mates come in, or when you hear about the story from last night or whatever, I think it's just human nature to put yourself in that position. And you can, I think, probably feel a lot of the stress and anxiety and all of that through, secondhand.
Well, I'll give you an example of something that traumatized both me, but not as much as the party I'm going to mention. One of the last cases that I had in the sheriff's office was a vehicle accident in a driveway where it was at no one's fault. It was just a bad accident. A 3-year-old boy was ran over and killed.
Oh, did you work that?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the father graduated high school with my wife. Like, I was connected with this guy in so many ways, even though I didn't personally know him. He had just left law enforcement. The father was a prior cop. The dad, the grandpa, whose property it was, I guess I shouldn't give too many details, but I had to experience it myself, and also I'm real time feeling this father's pain.
Yeah.
I'm real time empathizing with this person. And so, like, just like you said, in the squad room, and we don't know how to process it, especially if it's been just a couple hours. Like, it's not uncommon to come into a squad room and to see someone like, holy cow, dude, my day. And you find out what happened, and they saw bodies that were destroyed in an accident, or they got into a fight, or, there was someone, like, all the scenarios that could be any normal day in law enforcement. And they're just sitting there telling this real time. It's so raw. You're going to feel that when you're hearing them talk about it. You're like, holy cow, I heard that call. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even what you're talking about with that accident, I had no idea that you worked that, but that impacted me pretty heavily, and it wasn't even on my shift. Like, I had nothing to do with it, but just hearing about it was, I think it probably makes you think about your own family. And I remember when I was probably maybe 10 or 12, my dad worked at the sheriff's office, and he worked third shift. And I remember one morning he came in and he was just looking at me, and I was like, it's kind of creepy. Apparently he had worked a fatality, and the child looked so much like me. Now, this was before cell phones.
Yeah.
The kid looked so much like me that he had to make sure that I was in bed. Like, it just messed with his mind that much. Now, as a 12-year-old, that didn't have any real impact on me. But now, as mid 40s with kids, I can just imagine.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah, isn't that rough?
I can't imagine the pain he felt, but just hearing that tears me up.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of bring it back to the topics that you were thinking of, let's maybe first tackle the blues. How's that?
Yeah. That's fine.
So, yeah, I think I'm super interested in the deconstruction, and it's kind of funny. I went to a concert last night. Went to see Cake. You listen to
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun show. But I ran into a guy that I grew up with. He's a little bit older than me, but we grew up in the same environment. And it was the first time that I'd really had a conversation about it outside of like you or just a couple people. Like, it wasn't real deep, obviously, because of the environment, but we were just kind of catching up. And, at one point he asked if I was still going to church, and I was like, I am, but let me explain it, and I don't know.
What made you feel the need to explain? What made you feel the need to explain?
Well, because I feel like if if I say that I go to church, and if I told you the church that I go to, you would, your assumption would be, oh, well, then he probably believes this, like, basket of things, you know.
Uh-huh.
And what I was trying to explain to him is, well, I still believe it. I still have that basket, but it's just filled with completely different stuff. And I'm using,
Sure.
like, I now, I didn't use this analogy with him, but I now am using those things in different ways. I think the way they were intended to be used, or at least the way they were intended to be viewed, because for most of my life, all of my life, up until the past couple of years, it kind of, I used the things as battering rams, and like,
Hid behind
this
them
is
almost.
for sure, 100% for sure. Didn't have to think about things, didn't have to process things, didn't have to even make things work, because Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it.
Yep.
I don't have to consider political or anything. I don't have to consider anything, because this is my basket. Here, find the answers there.
Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting. Yeah. But in terms of the blues, so something I've been working on this week, really since Monday. Yeah, this week. I'm trying to do daily affirmations before I get out of bed. I'm trying to write down things that I'm grateful for. I'm trying to just write notes and reach out to people and just get reconnected. I think maybe one of the biggest things is trying to monitor what I'm listening to, because I listen to occasionally I'll have silence, but usually I'm listening to music or podcasts.
We know what you're listening to.
Yeah, which, by the way,
FB.
dude, I was so excited that you had found Me Without You on that
Yeah.
video you sent, and I was like, man, he's finally got it. I've converted him.
I remembered, so it was a song on an Instagram clip that I saw, and the Instagram clip was like that kind of psychedelic philosophy stuff that I like on Instagram. But that song was the soundtrack on it, and I was like, I've heard that, and I clicked on it and went down a deep dive, and I was like, I've heard this before. It's what Justin sent me.
Yeah.
And I remember
Yeah,
thinking the same thing. I was like, this is a Buddhist song, dude.
So yeah, I'm just trying to kind of minimize the depressing content that I'm taking in. Probably the biggest thing is I started running again.
Yeah.
I've been working out pretty consistently, but I started running again, and for whatever reason, I don't know the science behind it or the psychology behind it, but running, and I've known this for a while. I've even said this, that if I don't run, I get depressed. But still, every so often, I'll be like, yeah, I don't need it anymore, and I'll just quit. And then I'll go downhill, and then I'll be like, well, I'm so depressed. Well, I haven't run in a year or 6 months or whatever. So those are the big things that I'm kind of working on.
Dude, I have a 40% torn labrum and some compressed discs from some things that happened, on my time on this planet. And I know that if I don't stretch, I need to stretch daily. Like, I need to do a yoga routine is what I need to do every day. But I have this traction machine from the VA. It pulls my head from my shoulders and it relieves these compressed discs that I have in my neck. And I'll ride that pony. Like, they told me to start off at like a minute, and then they're like, only do 5 minutes. I ride this pony 15, 20 minutes hard. Like,
Yeah.
it has this little pump stick where you increase the pressure between there, and I'll max that baby out. I'm like, let's do it.
That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea for guys like you and I that just don't really know how to do anything moderately.
Yeah.
Like, there's only 10 settings on this. I'm going to crank it up to 11.
Yeah. They're like, no more than 5 minutes. It was like 20 minutes. Check.
Gotcha.
I know that if I don't do these neck stretches, or at least some shoulder stretches and lower back stretches, that I'm going to, like, I catch myself going like this every once in a while. My left shoulder will pull up, my neck hurts, I'm just in a pissy mood. And I know one of the easiest ways out of that is just stretch, idiot. Stretch like you're supposed to. I just started stretching before a run, like in the last couple of days. Started stretching before a run.
You know, that's something I don't do. I've never really done. I mean, I've done it a couple times, but by and large, I'll stretch after the run, but I don't usually do it before. But why do you suppose it is? Go ahead.
Oh, no, then I was just going to say, I feel like those, I don't know what they're really called. The dents in your pelvic dents, I feel like that gets real tight if I don't stretch. Like do that stretch where you pull your foot behind your back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it stretches along like basically from your abdomen down to your thigh. If I don't do that stretch, I get real tight in that area, like my pockets on my pelvis.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, you know, there's a couple ways to do this. So one of the ways that I want to say right now is because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I think God put that in us. And it is true if you expand what God is in your mind, like if you take him out of a box, but God put this thing in us, this button, and he gave us lots of these, but this is one of them, that if you're mentally depressed or frustrated or whatever, just running for a long time can help. Like just that thing can help. There's lots of other things and you do need to address it. You do need the yada yada, but just that thing can help. And when I say God, I'm talking about Big G upstairs. But if you want to say the universe through billions of years of evolution, whatever led you to here, to where either way, it's still the same thing. When you're depressed, running can get you out of it.
Yeah. So why do you think it is that we both know this, right? We've both been aware of this for a while. Why is it so hard to do the things that you already know? That, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's this, well, I don't know what to do. You do know what to do.
Yep.
So why don't I do it?
Yeah, you do. We feel, I mean, obviously that's a real complicated answer, but with me lately, because I've been there lately, is I feel like I don't need it right now. Like this tool that could help, like I don't need it. I'm not that bad right now, or I need to sit down and pray, or I don't need to sit down and meditate right now. I can just smoke a cigarette and look at Instagram, and that should be the same thing. Or I don't need to talk this out with a friend. I can just keep it inside. You know what I mean? Both of those are tricks that I use. But so that's like the passive way of avoiding it. The other one is we're too distracted. We don't have the clarity in that moment. We don't have the clarity to either recognize that we need it or recognize that it's an option there for us. Like we're so caught up in whatever this storm is on us. Like I can't get this dang deal, or I can't get this guy to come into work and I don't know how to communicate with him, blah, 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 blah. When really, if we just take a step back, you know, and give ourselves some distance and clarity and mindfulness, there might be an obvious answer right here. Or it might put it into perspective where like, this isn't the all-encompassing storm you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm sometimes, all the time, my own worst enemy. If I would just do the things that I know to do, I think I could avoid a lot of the trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been kind of in the blues for the past couple of weeks, for like maybe the last 3 weeks, knocking on a month. I feel like I'm just now getting on the other side of it. And I've definitely had good days, but I've been what I'm diagnosed with. One of the things I'm diagnosed with is dysthymia, which is chronic depression. And I've always described it like if this is normal, if this is where everyone is, I always feel like I'm down here. Like I always feel like I'm just below the radar. Like I've felt like I'm just not as happy as everyone else when I look around.
Yeah. You know, though, I think it's probably pretty accurate that most people that do struggle with that, you would never guess. Some of them probably, but like you're always so high energy that I never would have thought that that was a chronic issue for you. And people have said the same about me, like not about the energy, but you're always so happy. You seem like you've got everything, together under control. But that's just because I got a good mask. Like I'm really good at just not showing things. But I think that's probably the deal for most people that struggle with anxiety and depression is,
oh, sure.
You'd never know. They're the happiest guy in the room.
Yeah. So something good that I think a lot of people do struggle with, but I think most people make the right decision sometimes, is the understanding like life goes on. I have to go to work even if I'm depressed. And you know what? I have to talk to this person even if I'm depressed. So I'm going to fake a smile. Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. Good morning.
Yeah. How you doing? Good. How are you?
Yeah. Even though I am depressed, because I have to, and life goes on. And I think that's the right decision. I think it's a good decision. Obviously, you need to address these things at some point.
Yeah.
But it's the responsible thing. Life goes on, homie. You got to keep trucking.
Yeah.
Which is why you need tools in your toolbox.
Yeah. Yeah, never mind. I was going to say something else, but I think you're right. I think that you just gotta keep moving, because otherwise it's really easy to get. And I think this is what happens to me is, like you said earlier, I'm not that bad. I don't need it yet. Like I'll keep an eye on it. I'm doing okay. I'll find some other solutions. But then before you know it, it's been a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. And then now at that point, it feels like you're in a hole. And then like, how do you get out?
Yeah. Like running.
You got to do it. Yep. You got to do it. You got to do the go through the motions.
Yeah, dude. Just like running, like you can get to a point where you're running an 8.5 mile for an hour. And, if you work on it, you can get there. And then you take a couple years off, you know what I mean? Because I know,
yeah,
I know I could do that. Like, I'm good. I don't need to run. I can run an 8-minute mile.
Yeah,
for an hour.
What's next?
And then you hop on a treadmill and you're 55 pounds heavier than you were, but from back then, and you're gassed at 5 miles an hour.
Yeah,
it's a different story. You got to keep it up.
Yeah, which I think. So I've mentioned before that one of the things I've always loved about running is how it relates to so much. It relates to everything in life. But one of the things I used to actually like keep a journal of things I've learned through running. But one of the things that I wrote down was, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for so many different areas of life that, we talked about it. I might have talked about it last time. The entry before my most recent entries was 20 miles. Right.
Wow.
And then I didn't use it. I didn't use it for a long time. The next entry was 2 miles and I was struggling. And it's simply because I just neglected it. I just shirked it. But I mean, that's for everything in life. If you neglect your relationships, they're going to suffer. If you neglect your health outside of exercise, your diet, it's going to suffer. If you neglect, if you don't constantly pay attention to it or exercise it, no pun intended, then you can't expect it to improve.
Your finances, your relationships, your knowledge, like your
spirituality.
Your spirituality, your pursuit of knowledge. Like, how many people do you know got a bachelor's, 10, 15 years ago and think that they're good about that subject from now on? There's been a lot of discovery just in that one field in the last 10, 15 years. Plus, there's people coming out with all these new ideas. You have to stay on it to be relevant.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine if society or technology didn't move with the new findings, right? Like, you look at medical procedures that they used to do 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or, maybe within 50 years, I don't know. But we would look at the procedure and we would say, what are you doing? Well, if you don't stay current with new developments, but it's the same, like I said, it's the same with everything, I think. And that's one of the things that I love about running.
Do you think you could get the same thing from just a hard gym exercise? Like, I think maybe with martial arts, you can get to the same thing, like specifically grappling, jujitsu, or sparring and the striking ones. But do you think you can get the same thing with like lifting weights?
I haven't been able to.
Yeah.
And part of that might be because it may just be because of the way that I lift weights or how I do it. It's not super intense. I try to go heavy, but it's not like with running, it's 40 minutes. Like I'm actively moving for 40-ish minutes. And with lifting weights, it's 15 seconds and then rest for a minute. 15 seconds and then rest for a minute. And so I think it's a different type of exercise. But even with jiu-jitsu, I still didn't feel the same. It was the same physical exhaustion, even more. Like it was much more physically exhausting, but it didn't have the mental benefit that running does.
Yeah. Mental benefit, I think running comes out above a lot of things. But I was going to say about lifting weights, there's an exception that comes in my mind, and maybe it's just because of personalities, but I'll bleep his name out. Went, guys like that, guys that are heavy lifters and that's their thing. If you watch them work out, they get in it. They're like, ah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're getting something that I don't, and maybe they look at running the same way. They're like, well, I know they do because they talk smack about running.
I think you might have, no, maybe it wasn't you. Somebody told me something that Jocko had said about runners, about how, I'm going to butcher it, so I probably shouldn't even say it, but something along the lines of running doesn't require strength. And they were saying it kind of as a ribbing kind of thing, like, you're just a runner, doesn't require strength. There's what Jocko said. But yeah, I can see how he, big strong guy, he would look at running like there's no value in that. Just like I do see value in lifting weights, but just not, again, for the mental clarity.
And let me provide a perspective that I don't think everybody knows, or it's not as obvious to everybody as it would be to some specifically American military vets. Is Jocko says running doesn't require strength, but his whole persona is Navy SEAL. In BUDS and Navy SEAL, like at the very basic barrier to entry in BUDS, you're running 6 miles a day just to eat, because the chow hall is a mile away from the barracks and the grinder. So you have to run a mile there and a mile back 3 times a day just to eat. That's not counting the actual runs that happens for physical exercise, or the timed runs, or the races, or the obstacle course where you're constantly running. So you see a bunch of spec war dudes that are like this, like they're these giant gorillas that talk smack on cardio, but they still are running. Like, yeah, I know you're saying that, but you're still running all the time.
Right. And if you didn't, then you wouldn't be like,
you wouldn't be here.
It's a barrier. What is do they have time limit? You said timed runs. Like what's the standard minute per mile?
I don't know what it is now, but back in the early aughts when I joined the Navy, it was, I think they wanted you to run like something kind of easy, like a 10.5 minute mile and a half, which is kicking it. Like that's running, but
oh wow, okay. I thought you were saying 10.5 minutes a mile, but you're saying like a mile and a half in 10.5 minutes.
10.5 minutes.
Pretty quick.
It was like but it was also like 40 push-ups, 8 pull-ups, I think something silly like 60 sit-ups, which is a lot to a lot of people. It's all about perspective. That's a lot to a lot of people. But if you're thinking about going to buds, that is the absolute bare minimum that you should be able to do. Like you should be able to run a lot faster than that. Oh, and you have to swim 500 meters in, I want to say 15 or 14 minutes, something like that. But it is another timed event, which is running, which is specific to buds. Most other special operation forces don't have swimming as a barrier to entry. But that, like I said, that's the minimum. You should be able to. I never actually went to buds. I wanted to over and over again, but life didn't let it happen. I backed out of it the first time. I backed out of it because I was scared. And then when I was ready to go, my wife was pregnant, and then I was ready to go again, and I was past my time in service. I had been in the Navy too long, so that's why I went to the Riverines instead. And the Riverines checked all the boxes that I ever wanted to get from Navy SEALs. The Riverines checked those boxes.
Yeah.
So I'm good.
Did you have to swim for that?
Yeah, you sure did. You had to be a second class. Yeah, you had to be a second class swimmer for the Riverines, which again isn't terrible. You had to swim 50 meters with freestyle, swim 50 meters with a backstroke, swim 50 meters with a double breast, and then swim 50 meters with the side stroke. And you had to do a dead man float for 5 minutes where you float on your face and you just pick your head up to the side to breathe. But besides picking your head up to the side to breathe, your face is underwater, and like they'll disqualify you if you keep your face up. Like if you come up and start blinking, get out of the pool.
Wow.
So it's just, and you let the bubbles come out.
For a reference, like how long is like an Olympic size swimming pool?
I think the Olympic pools are 50 meters, but the lap pools, so like the lap pools at your YMCA,
yeah, that's what I mean.
25.
Yeah.
So yeah,
okay, so down and back.
So down is 25, down and back is 50.
Right.
Yeah. So a down and back freestyle, down and back side, double breast, and backstroke. And then 5 minute dead man float. You had to jump off a high diving board, which was nothing. And you had to, I think that was it. For some other that was the barrier to entry. For first class swimmer, you have to do this obstacle course, which was a blast. It's at the Naval Special Warfare Facility. This is all public information. This is all open source information. It's at the Naval Special Warfare Swim Facility in Virginia. And there you start off on this platform with this rope, and you jump off, swing on the rope, and so here's the swing. Here's the platform with the swing. You're swinging this way. Over here is this net that's looped. Like both ends of the net are on the ceiling, but this big net is dangling like here. And if you fall off this obstacle course, you have failed. You swing on a rope to this net, but how you get on the net is you have to wrap the foot. You can't see my feet. You have to wrap the rope around your feet like you do when you're climbing a rope. You use your foot as the anchor. You wrap the rope around your feet like that, and it's so much fun. You bend backwards. You do like a backflip, because that's the only way that you can actually grab. You lined up in a perfect, and we all learned this from SEALs that were there that gave us the trick, but that's the only way you land perfectly on the loop of the net that's going down like that. So you do a swinging backflip holding onto a rope by your feet.
Sounds easy enough.
It's terrifying.
But could you not just like swing and just jump off into the net?
You never catch it. You never catch it. You might.
Yeah.
The only way you can do that is if you force like your arm through one of there, because your hand's so weak. Your hands are so weak whenever you get there, and you never hit it at the same. Like your timing's always off. Your space is always off when you're swinging like Tarzan and just let go.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll pin the rope between you and the net, so then you got to let go, and then you're just hanging with one skinny hand. You always fall off. You line up perfectly, like you line up And if you do the backflip, your chest and your belly and your thighs all hit the net together. So you go like Spider-Man and you grab it. And then you're like, okay, one arm through there, one arm through there. Then you got to negotiate this net. You have to climb from one end to the other end of this loop, jump on a platform, and like there's some monkey bars, an obstacle course like where you jump over something, and then another rope climb and a high jump into the pool, and that's the end.
Oh,
but the net's at the beginning. You start off with that swing on the net. Just like, God dang.
And so this is like a you apply to be in the Riverines, you go through your oral boards, you did your tests, all that kind of stuff, and now it's time for the physical test. So if you fall off, or if you don't make it in the allotted time, you're just out.
No, that's how it happens. In reality, that's how it was supposed to be. So when the Riverines were born, a little Riverine history for some folks most people aren't interested in. I've said before that amphibious warfare has always been a part of naval warfare, like driving the little boats in the rivers and then the deltas and on the beaches. That's always been a part of Navy warfare. Like President Kennedy, he's considered a Riverine or in the Riverine Club because he drove a torpedo boat. He was the captain of a little torpedo boat during World War II that was sinking Japanese ships in the Pacific. That's like the same size of boat that I drove. During the Vietnam War, they officially stood up the Riverine squadrons, the Riverine combat units they were called back then, and they had a wide variety of platforms, but it was all different size boats and helicopters. They had an Army helicopter squadron attached to them, and that's where Riverines were born. Real Riverines were born in Vietnam. Like any sailor what sailors would know as a Riverine was born in Vietnam. So were SEALs, out of the same thing. Well, then Riverines were disbanded after the Vietnam War, but they kept a little contingency of like reserve guys that still practiced and trained in the Riverine boats. Well, in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, those little boat guys became what they called SWCC, Special Warfare Combat Crewmen. And they're super cool. We used to talk a lot of smack about each other, but SWCC's still around and Riverines aren't, so SWCC wins.
Yeah.
They're airborne. They're special operators, but they're specifically boat drivers. Like their whole mission in life is to get. In our mission in life was the same thing, was to get people from point A to point B. We were really fancy taxi drivers. That's all we were. But they're airborne. They have these super cool ships that I cannot talk about, but you could Google it. SWCC has these super cool just equipment. One of their bases is in Mississippi. This is public information. One of their bases is in Mississippi at a NASA base, and it's one of two 360-degree firing ranges you can go to in the United States. Like in the military, anywhere you go, you can shoot, and it's on this NASA base down in Mississippi. Yeah, it's cool.
Now I know some of your combat obviously didn't happen from a boat, right? Or did it all happen from a boat?
All the combat that I had an active role in happened. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
we'll cut that out.
Do most? Well, maybe you can cut this out too.
Just because of people that would be listening to this, I wouldn't want them to hear.
Say it again.
Because of people that I know listen to this, I wouldn't want them to hear.
Okay. Yeah, we could skip that. Well, you've successfully convinced me that I don't. Yeah, that's not for me. Never was.
Oh, but it was so much fun. It was the time of my life.
Yeah,
man. I don't know how we got there from depression, or tools to get out of depression.
You got to become a Riverine. I'll tell you this.
Oh,
And
I
then
was
we can.
talking about seals that can run. Is the seals have always
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's funny they talk about trash on running, but they run.
Yeah. Um, one exercise that I know that I just don't have any business doing is swimming. I
Oh,
feel
really?
like I if you invite me to a pool party, I can swim some laps and I can have a good time, whatever. I tried swimming at the Y, and dude, I thought I was going to drown. It was so it was hard, and this was back when I was running. Like I was in good
Yeah.
shape, but it was just something else.
Swimming is like pull-ups, and I had this conversation with Sarah before, back when me and her were still friends, but I'll bleep that part out too. Swimming is, you have to be honest. Like you can't tough your way through swimming. You
Yeah.
either are going to do the exercise or you're going to drown. It's like pull-ups. You either have the ability to pull yourself up or you're not getting up there. Like you can tough your way through. I feel like you can tough your way through push-ups and sit-ups. I know you can tough your way through a run because people hurt themselves toughing their way through runs. You can't tough your way through a swim. And you can't tough your way through pull-ups. Those two, you have to be able to do it.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me about pull-ups and swimming specifically is like with running, you just slow your pace. Even with a bench press, you can run it out. But with swimming,
that's where it pays to learn different strokes, because if you learn how to backstroke, a lot of people pass Navy boot camp by the backstroke. Like backstroke is the easiest stroke to learn. It's where you just poke your chest up as high as you can and you pick your hands up the side, pulling them out, and then go like this. You're just making snow angels with your arms and your legs like that. That's how a lot of people pass Navy boot camp, because you have to be able to swim to pass Navy boot camp.
With any style, like you can just choose whichever stroke. Okay.
And a lot of people show up to boot camp not knowing how to swim at all. So that's the easiest one to learn. That's the easiest stroke to learn. If you learn how to backstroke, it'll save your life. I mean, but you're definitely not an efficient swimmer. But you can, like if you're on Cheney Lake or wherever, a big lake. I thought about this because I thought about why swimming is it's a necessary skill. If you drive off of a bridge and you're going across the lake, and you got to be able to kick out your window and unbuckle your loved one, kick out the window, and swim to the other side. You can do that with a backstroke. You can hold someone right here. It's what rescue swimmers do. Hold someone right here and just go like this. And you're going to be swallowing a lot of water, but you can make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to know something funny that is completely irrelevant? I just remembered it. There was a time when the interdiction team, back before, I'm sure it was before you were on the department, but we had gone up to an agency to work with them on I-70 to kind of see how they do things, whatever. Well, we got into town the evening before the shift we were going on, and we had gone out to eat with a bunch of the guys, and everybody was drinking, having a good time. And for some reason, I challenged one of the troopers to a swimming competition because he said something about how he was a good swimmer, and I was like, "Well, I'm better. I'll bet you couldn't beat me." Now, keep in mind that I was just as terrible back then as I am now, but it got pretty serious. We never actually ended up in a pool, but I was convinced that I could beat him in swimming. I have no idea his background. I have no, and it's not even something that I'm like proud of. Like I'm not a good swimmer. I know this.
This story that you're telling me, I could lay it over and it would be the same exact picture as when you tell me you could fight a bear.
Not fight, kill.
Okay, when you could kill a bear with your hands.
A fight with well, not my arms, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying without any weapons, you could.
Yeah,
that is the same thing. I thought you were going to say that he was a rescue swimmer, because rescue swimmers are like the best swimmers in the Navy.
He might have been. I have no idea.
Yeah, that's
probably
like you
was.
telling me that you could win and you'd still beat him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easily.
Okay.
But anyway, so we got to address the other topic because we're going to run out of time pretty quick. What do you mean when you say deconstruction, and what has yours looked
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. This is something I talk about. I have a pretty close friend that he's been a lifelong kind of friend and mentor, and I just started talking to him again like over the last 6 months in this scheduled way. And I've realized he's like I think we would call him a coach in real estate, even though we're not talking about we are talking about business sometimes, but he's just filling the role as a life coach right now.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about deconstruction, which helps because I feel like you have to actually like sometimes either write out or talk out things to know what you really mean about that and what you really think. To me, I mean, why it was even needed, why a deconstruction is pretty self-explanatory. You tear, they think about, you deconstruct a building, you demolish it. And, with deconstruction, maybe it's a little bit more gentle than that. Like you're taking out windows or taking out doors or maybe remodeling it. But, why in the first place is because I had to wrestle with the idea my whole life that the theology, the way we talked about God at church, and the way I believed in my heart about God in my mind, the picture of God in my mind, and I'm talking about the perfect Father, the head of the Trinity, the judge at the end of days, and the judge at your death, almost like this being that's always going to be out of your reach. Even in heaven, he's still going to be up there, like on a mountain in this throne. Like that's not a place whatever. In theology, this Western evangelical picture of God, and then Jesus was the intercessor. Jesus, which was God as man. Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. He was God in man's flesh. And then the Holy Spirit, which was the divine power, the archetypical, the spirit, the actual thing that gets things done. This Trinity, and all the attributes we put on him and I believed in, I don't think that's in the Bible. And it's really hard. I feel like the verses that we did use to make that picture of God, which is a beautiful picture, you have to take some verses. The reality is you have to take some verses out of context, definitely in the context that it was written in, like what this person is actually talking about whenever they say these things. You have to take it out of that context to make it fit into the box of this Western evangelical picture of God. You have to take our Western evangelical picture of God does not fit the Bible, or the Bible doesn't fit it. You have to bend it, and you have to take some things out of context in order to do that. One of the biggest things that I always struggled with, and that I struggled with, I think rightly so, to the point where I don't accept it, is a loving, perfect Father, talking about, all the things, cannot be the same God that was in charge during a lot of the Old Testament. Yeah. Just because of the things that, man, I don't think my God isn't about. And I'm talking about, I mean, there's a list of where do you start? I'm talking about the genocide, the genocide. If you read in the historical text, they kept some of their prisoners of war for work, and they kept some of them for pleasure. They're talking about slaves, and some of them sexual slaves. They're talking about, like I said, the genocide, slavery, the way they treated women, the murder of anyone that had a different faith than you, especially when you look at it through a historical lens. that we'll talk about, I'm sure, but like Elohim, what that word actually means, and what that word actually means in Hebrew and in the Ugaritic language that it came from versus what we want it to be. So that's a good spot, is Elohim. Elohim is a plural word. It means little g gods, plural. If you take it to its where it comes from, so it means plural gods in Hebrew. What Hebrew came from was Ugaritic. I was preparing for today. I took some notes. In the Ugaritic language, it means the children of El. El was the head of the Ugaritic pantheon, and the children of El were gods. They were Elohim, and in that entire region, Babylon, what the Old Testament calls Canaan, Hebrew, Syria, Ethiopia, Israel, that word was the same. It was Elohim, which means the children of El, which was understood as gods. And so, yeah. Sorry, I'll cut out the silence. I did write some stuff to keep me on track.
Oh, you're right.
So I'm talking about the need for deconstruction. Just learning what Elohim means. And there's a lot of changes that happened in the Old Testament, specifically the Old Testament, when it was translated from ancient Hebrew to Greek. Like, it was the ancient Hebrews around 2,500 years ago that did this, but it was because of the introduction of Greco-Roman ideas. Scholars will call this the Greco-Roman influence of Judaism, or the Greco-Roman era of Israel. And that's when, like, the idea of dualism was introduced into the region. When it was translated from Hebrew into Greek is when they started changing words. Like Elohim, whenever they wanted it to mean Yahweh, it meant Yahweh. And whenever they wanted it to mean children of God, they changed it usually to angels. Whenever they want it, because it was the same word. They were using, like, Gabriel was an Elohim, Michael was an Elohim, the spirit that appeared in Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels that appeared there, those were Elohim. The son of, like the Son of God in Daniel that appeared in the lion's den, that was an Elohim. They're using the same word. So in Greek they change it, and specifically when they're talking about gods of other nations like Baal and Moloch, in the Hebrew Baal was an Elohim. He even keeps the same El at the end of his name, like Gabriel, Baal. He even keeps the same God prefixure on his name. So if you speak the language, you're not calling it false god, you're calling it the god Baal. But in Greek, they changed it. They added false god. So there's already editing. We know this because we have things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, or like ancient Hebrew versions of these scrolls, what scholars would call the Deuteronomic text. They were written in ancient Hebrew, or there's ancient Hebrew versions of them, and it's using this word Elohim. Just like in Genesis, in the creation story, when God said, "Let us create man in our own image," they're using that same word Elohim, and specifically that creation story is borrowed from a Canaanite creation story, and it's using the Canaanite pantheon, of which Yahweh was a piece. Yahweh was the regional god of what we call Israel. And he's never called Yahweh until he introduces himself to Moses when Moses kills the slave master and is gone. And God meets him in the burning bush. He said, "Hey, my name's Yahweh. Your ancestors knew me as Elohim." He said, "But and also I'm going to reveal to you your entire ancestor history. You're going to be the first, whatever." So yeah, Yahweh, Yahweh was officially became the God post-Babylonian Exodus. So Babylon conquered Israel. We're talking about the books of Daniel, or Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Ruth, Esther, right? These are all Babylonian era Jews. During the time in Babylon is when the Jews, according to the Old Testament, according to the priestly texts, that's when they were introduced to Baal and all these other false gods during the time they were part of Babylon. Well, eventually, for whatever reason, lots of different reasons, the Persian Empire, Babylon, exiled these group of people and sent them, and they landed in Israel. They happened to land in the territory of Yahweh, of which Yahweh was one of many regional gods that were all Elohim, the children of El. Well, it seems like, according to text and according to any academic research, what all the evidence points to is that's when Yahweh was first introduced as a name, was post-Babylonian expulsion. That's when the God of the Old Testament changed from "we are many gods," which is what he says, which is what he's saying when "let us." It's let the divine council create this man, whatever. Is when it changed from a polytheistic religion to a monotheistic religion, was post Babylonian expulsion. I know I'm talking in a lot of, what I'm saying is that we know, based on science and based on history, like this is all backed up by archaeologists, by historians, by actual linguists, like I said, what the word actually means. When God calls himself Elohim, he's actually referring to a pantheon of other gods. This is in direct contradiction to the Western evangelical theology that was on me.
Yeah, I'm picturing, as you're saying, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about all of the, not even arguments, because I don't know that there is an argument, but all of the issues mainstream Christianity would have with what you're saying. But you just, and most of my Christian life, and I think most of the church today, sees science and scholarship and all of these other things as competing, or they see them as what's the word I'm looking for?
Confusion as the enemy, almost, is
it's
how
the
we
enemy.
treat it.
They see it as the enemy, and even last night I said that I went to that concert, and the guy that I was talking to said that he doesn't believe in God. He doesn't think there's anything out there. He believes in science. And so I think it can be on both sides. Like, science doesn't mean that there's no God, and the fact that there is or if there is a God, it doesn't, like, it can all work together. It has to.
Yeah.
If both things are true, then they both have to work together.
Yeah, I think we're purposefully splitting hairs and almost willfully ignorant whenever we say things like that. And obviously that sounds like a harsh judgment, but someone that I look up to, I had a conversation with earlier today, and we said kind of the same statement, but on the other side, he was like, yeah, when you call God universe, really, you're talking about his creation. The creation isn't God. God is God. He's the one who made the universe. And I didn't say it, but the reality is like, okay, sure. But aren't we kind of splitting hairs here? Like, aren't we talking about, when I say the universe, I'm talking about everything. And I'm even talking about the source, like where the Big Bang came from. That's what I'm talking about when I say the universe. And I'm talking about how my parents raised me, the conversations I've had, what has led me to here, that finger on my life. That's what I'm talking about. And that's exactly what I mean when I say God. But maybe even the universe takes God out of that box.
Yeah. And so that's how I That's how I conceptualize God, is being the universe. But it's so much more than the tree in my front yard. Like that's
Yeah.
in the universe. I'm in the universe. You're in the universe. But when I say universe, I'm talking about even the unseen things, the energy and the vibrations and the thought and the power, the will, everything, even what's going to happen later on hasn't happened yet. Like it's about 12:30, 2 o'clock today. Whatever happens is all part of the universe.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm talking about when I say God,
Yeah.
or when I say universe or whatever. But yeah, I just, man, those facts, historical, archaeological, scientific, if we stop looking at those as the enemy and use them for what they are. Now, science doesn't explain everything; it's not intended to. But use what can be proved. Use what makes sense. I just don't know that you can come up with mainstream Western evangelical Christianity. It doesn't add up.
Well, here's something I've been thinking about pretty recently, was that science, and I don't think it behaves this way, but how it's all the time, how it's supposed to behave is it's supposed to be constantly learning and constantly evolving. Like you said, medical science is so far today past what it was in the 90s. If we respected and treated religion or theology with the same respect and honesty, that's the thing. That's why this deconstruction was necessary, is it had to be honest with me. Just like the mean blood-sucking God of the Old Testament, I cannot honestly make that the same God that Jesus was talking about, at least within me.
Yeah.
Is the same way that we don't do bloodletting and putting on leeches, you know what I mean? And kicking the women out of the house whenever it's their time, because the science has evolved.
Yeah. Yeah, but for whatever reason, I think it's because I think ultimately it comes down to a worship of the Bible. I think that a lot of people, myself included, previously, I think a lot of people worship the Bible, and if it was perfect, if it is perfect, then it can't evolve. It can't change. And so, because of the view of the Bible that mainstream Christianity has, it can't change from 2,000 years ago. And think of any other part of life that we're like, well, no, this is how we did it 2,000 years ago, so that's why we're going to keep doing it.
Here's some things that we're learning, and yes, that is true. Is it can't, like what we put on that, it can't grow out of that, if that is true. The reality is that it has changed. Like first century Christians, and I'm talking about the 90 years after Christ, Christianity was a lot different back then than what we're talking about. The idea of the Trinity, that's the thing, is I always rebutted I always understood when God said, let us make man in our own image, like, oh, they're talking about the Trinity. The Trinity didn't exist. No, they're talking about multiple gods. The idea of it. Jesus, I'm going to get into some some hot water around here, but it's just historical fact. Jesus's godhood was not established. It wasn't even being discussed until the Council of Nicaea, 367 years after Jesus was physically on this planet. 367 years after he left this physical form is when they said Jesus is made of the same stuff as God. That was the term that they used in Latin, and I can't remember what the Latin word is, but it was made of the same stuff, of the same substance. And that's how in Christianity, or what Christianity was at the time, that's when that was the birth of the Trinity. And that was the birth of, I don't know how to say this without sounding offensive, that was the birth of Jesus's godhood. Because the godhood that he talked about in John 1, or in John 10, I'm sorry, right? John 10 or 3.
Which one?
When he said, "I'm in God and God is in me," John 3:10. He said, "I'm in God and God is in me." And what we don't like, or what oftentimes gets cut out of that, is when he said, "And Jesus, or in Father, I want my disciples to be in me the same way I'm in you, and we're all in you." He was using the same language as the angel at Sodom and Gomorrah, the little god at Sodom and Gomorrah, when he was describing his authority. He said, "I am the represent." Like, it's the same "I am" that was the angel's authority as the holy bearer, as the bearer of the holy name, the bearer of of the God name. He was using the same language, the same "I am," when he challenged the Pharisees and said that "I am." And also whenever he said, "I'm in God and God is in me, and you guys be in me." What we use when we say, and I haven't had this all figured out, but part of my deconstruction is Jesus might not have said that he's God the same way that we put on him that he's God. It's hard to get there from the actual text. Whenever you put the text in context of like what the actual speaking styles were, where that came from, he doesn't right out say, "I'm God," the way that we say he did in Western evangelicalism.
Yeah. And that to me is probably been the biggest contributor to where I've ended up, is recognizing, believing that the Bible that we read today was not what they had. It's not the original texts. And on top of that, the authors of the specific books had their own, like Matthew had his own view of what the Messiah should be. And so he's seeing everything in light of that. And so that's maybe how he wrote it down, but more than likely a scribe down the road said, "No, this is what he meant." And if we want, just like in the Council of Nicaea, well, if we want this theology or this truth or this teaching, then we have to cut that, and this is what this has to mean, and just kind of put it all together to make it show the picture we want. But it's not necessarily, I don't believe, what was actually said. And so
it's impossible for it to have been.
Even reading the red letters, well, let's just look at the words Jesus said. But I'm not convinced. I don't know that he actually said those things. Maybe
who wrote
some
it
of
down
them.
When he was being flogged by Pilate and by, who wrote these words down? There was
those
no
conversations.
one there.
Yeah. That's so. So when did all this start for you?
Yeah. So it has definitely, what I say now is I'm post deconstruction. Like this was like my deconstruction, my theological deconstruction is the acceptance of all these things that I had been wrestling with since childhood. One of my earliest memories, and it was a heartbreaking memory it was just me in my backyard when I lived at the group home. I put on a super spiritual face, and we had these awards there at the group home called best Christian character. And I won that sucker 2 years in a row. And Mr. HFS or HFC Home for Children, I won Mr. HFC 2 years in a row. It was around the same time that I won that. I remember being in my backyard, and I kept reading about how God spoke to Elijah. At first it was the hurricane winds, and Elijah said, "Is that you?" And it wasn't God. Then it was the fire, and he said, "Is that you?" It's not God. Then he went through all these things, and then it was the still small voice, and that's where God spoke to Elijah. I was praying, and I was walking the walk. I was doing what I was supposed to do. And I think about like Socrates or maybe the ancient Israelite Pharisees. Like I was being holier than thou. I was checking the boxes. And I begged for God, talk to me. Let me hear something. Like make a bird squeak, make a frog ribbit. Like I will take whatever you get. And it was dead silent. And like nothing. The wind wasn't blowing. I couldn't hear a bird. It was just me and like this void all of a sudden. And this was in East Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains. There's lots of natural wildlife around there, even in the cities. And it was just dead silent. And that still, like, there's still emotions. I feel those emotions now as I'm telling this story because I never told anyone about that. And I tucked it away. I'm like, don't pay any attention to that. Like, let's forget that ever happened, because I had faith the size of a mustard seed, at least.
Yeah.
And I was compromising with God. I was like, make a bird squeak. I'll count
anything. Anything.
Give me something. And it was dead silent. So things like that, trauma, abuse, childhood abuse, childhood trauma as an adult in the military, going to the group home, this weird relationship with my relationship with the universe. What is my universe? Taken away from my mom, living in a group home, in a holy church, Christian group home, joining the military, having all the experiences, a lot of them great and beautiful, but seeing people get hurt, having when I was in Afghanistan, I was super depressed. The most depressed I think a person can be. I was that far depressed when I was in Afghanistan my first time. And I ordered a Deepak Chopra meditation CD and an Anthony Robbins CD box set. I still have both those things. And those two things probably saved my life back then. Anthony Robbins. Yep. And what they introduced was meditation from Deepak Chopra. At the time, it was really far out for me, but now it's kind of simple. Some guided meditations. And Anthony Robbins, his whole shtick, which is awesome and it works, is cognitive based therapy. That's what his whole shtick is, the CBT. CBT is based off of Greek Stoicism. Like, yeah, I'm good. I had it. There's this book that has been a college textbook for many years on a lot of campuses, and it's the philosophy of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's about Stoicism. It's like, basically, whether they know it or not, and I've met a lot of psychologists who don't know this, or maybe don't remember it from their time in school, but psychology is based on Stoicism. Like Western psychology comes from Stoicism. So that was the first time I got something that helped me and saved me in a way, but it was totally outside of God, or outside of what my picture of God was at the time. Yeah. It was outside of Sunday school Jesus. Is actually a heresy, according to Sunday school. You know, Deepak Chopra, his stuff was straight up Hinduism, and that was probably my first introduction to Hinduism. Now I'm thinking about it, but his stuff is straight Hinduism, and I had to wrestle with these things. Saved me, and man, I just think about the weight of these words. My prayers and my fasting and me trying to do all the tricks to make God happy with me, those weren't working. Like, it was actually making me more depressed. And I kept thinking about that feeling of me crying out to God and not getting anything back. I kept going back to that time in my backyard, mentally, and in my vibe or whatever. I kept going back to there where I was just desperately crying out to God, and nothing happened. Now, post-deconstruction, with the big view, I would say he actually did speak to me, just not on my timeline. Maybe he spoke through Deepak, Actually, I know that's exactly what he did. Later on, he spoke through Tony. Yeah, that's what led up that a lifetime of these experiences were leading up to that, and I was constantly wrestling with. That's weird when my hand goes in front of my camera like that. It distracts me. I was constantly wrestling with the ideas in the Old Testament because I have read the Bible. Like I said, I was checking all the boxes. I read the entire thing. A lot of it's not committed to memory as much as I wish it was, but I read about the genocides. I caught the contradictions, even in like the stuff that's supposed to be mundane, like the family trees. There's big contradictions between books of the Bible and these family trees. There's two different creation stories that we pretend like are the same story when they're clearly not. And all, like I said, the genocide, the rape, the way they treat women, slaves, and people of other faiths, and homosexuality, and the tendency of the church to conveniently use that, pick out pieces from that book, from the Old Testament, to say, this is what a holy person does. Like, well, pastor, in the same chapter, it says, gluttony's a sin, and you're 3 bills, homie, and I know who's paying for it. Oh, we're saved by grace. We're not under that. Or how about you can't eat shrimp or shellfish? That doesn't apply to us. That's Old Testament. Well, so is all this other nonsense you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, but in the last couple of years is when I put all that together, I think, and came out of it.
But you still go to church on Sundays.
Yeah.
Like a normal, like I always look at non-denominational as basically Southern Baptist. Like that's basically we say non-denominational, but it's Southern Baptist. Is that the case for yours, or is yours more?
You know what's funny is the pastor of my church, the main pastor of my church, is the son of a very famous Baptist preacher, or like his dad was a Baptist televangelist back in the day.
You don't go to Andy Stanley's church, do you?
Yeah, I sure do.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's hasn't he's gotten in some hot water, hadn't he, for maybe being a little less mainstream, a little more theologically liberal kind of.
I don't know, but you're really making me like him more and more. The main reason so yes, I do go to church. I still call myself a Christian because I accepted something, and this is just like depression. This is a part of the human condition that we all do, mostly unknowingly, but the Western evangelicals definitely do this. Is I pick and choose what pieces of the Bible that I'm going to use to help my life and that I'm going to choose to follow as my religious path. I actively and consciously pick and choose which ones, what's the picture of God that I'm making. And instead of these pieces that I don't like, the rape and genocide and racist and, all these old parts of God, that's not my God anymore. I'm actively taking that out. And I'm also putting in pieces now of, I don't want to get too far out there, but
well, can I just interrupt you real quick?
Yeah.
Because as you're talking, I know that somebody would say, well, you can't just make your own. Well, you're worshiping your own God. You've created your own God. You don't believe in God. You believe in yourself.
Yep.
But you have to.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
It's what we do.
You have to. Because none of us read it the same. None of us, even if we read the same words on the page, we have different understandings or different, it just carries different weight or whatever it is. Like you have to establish who you think God is. And that's different than what this person believes and who that person believes, even if they all use the same name.
Paul talked about this in the New Testament. He was telling, so like the Gentile Christians, he was telling them, hey, you're not bound by the Old Testament. He said, you're saved through Jesus. You're saved through grace. But if you do want to follow it, he talked about circumcision. He's like, I don't recommend you circumcising yourself. But if you do want to, you're part of that, but just know Jesus saved us from these old rules. And he said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. We do this.
Yeah.
It's been a part of our shtick. It's been a part of Christians since the beginning.
Yeah. And you can't get away from it. So just for, as you're saying, that you got rid of the things you didn't like and you've brought things you do. We all do it.
Yeah. I've gone to other sources. I've talked about this in a lot of different ways, but I think of Christianity now, and I still call myself a Christian. I think of our theology as a multi-tool. And this multi-tool has a lot of useful attachments on it. Some of them, some of the attachments, like maybe the tweezers or the little scissors on the multi-tool, those aren't the best. Yeah, the toothpick, maybe those aren't actually the best. And if we're honest, it actually sucks at that. Yeah. But it's there. If you are part of a tradition and you feel connected, like your family and your culture and even your identity is part of a tradition where this multi-tool puts you in the club and you love people that have this, I'm obviously being facetious, kind of, but literal also. It's okay to keep that multi-tool and to stay in that multi-tool club, but you should also know that the tweezers suck, the scissors suck, and there are better tweezers and better scissors out there. There's a better knife out there. There's better pliers out there. And when I say that, these other tools, I'm talking about where finding peace. I wasn't able to find this peace strictly through my Western evangelicalism. I found it through mindfulness and meditation and stoicism, cognitive behavioral therapy. That was maybe a better tool than what the multi-tool of Western evangelicalism was giving me. Mm-hmm. But Paul says a lot of the same stuff. Paul was a contemporary of Epictetus, and he had, you can tell because it has influenced his writing. He was around 500 years after Socrates, so you can tell there's some Socratic stuff. He's definitely Greek influenced. Yeah. So like meditation, mindfulness meditation, and stoicism are the two big things that I've added to my toolbox as far as theology goes, post-deconstruction.
Yeah. I like the idea of being post-deconstruction. I like that terminology, and I think that that's where I am too, because there comes a point where you've taken everything down. Mm-hmm. You can't take anything else down. Like it's
right.
And now what are you going to do with it?
Right.
You either have to say, well, I don't believe in any of it, which I do. Like I do still believe in God. And so for you and I, we have to say, okay, well, what do we do with all these parts? And one of the podcasts that I really liked was Rhett and Link. I think you put me onto that, or maybe I don't remember.
I sent it to you.
Did you? One of the episodes where he talks about the house, and he realized there were problems with this house, and everybody around was pretending like there weren't any problems. And eventually, he was like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially, we got to do something about this. And so he started tearing the house down. Now, I don't remember if he mentioned specifically building it back up.
I think he said that he's on the sidewalk now looking at all the other houses.
Okay. But I've done that, and maybe I'll do it again. I hope I'll do it again, because I don't want to be the same person in 5 years that I am now. But yeah, I've come up with a completely different design. Completely different design than I had. But like you, I still call myself a Christian. I still am a Christian. I still follow Christ. I I don't think that probably most. Actually, I'm going to rephrase this. I was going to say I don't think that most people would probably agree with me that I am a Christian. But I think, if we're being honest, I think that churches are full of people that just don't wrestle with this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't wrestle, if you don't look at the house, then it's very easy to say, well, this is a perfect house. And so I think the reason that most people would say, well, you don't belong, is because a lot of them never ask those questions. And if they would probably come up with similar answers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I mean. That's what I mean. So it's just like science. Like, most of us don't need to worry about how my electrical outlet works. I don't need to teach myself how that works in order for me to plug a light in and it comes on. That's just outside of my thing. But somebody does. Just like science, if we treat our spiritual, and I think me and you, because we were church kids and we really drank the Kool-Aid, like we really got in there, different but same. You're in the Baptist tradition and I was in the Pentecostal tradition. They if you treat it honestly, like if you make this make sense, like I said, God, I need you to talk to me. I have the faith the size of a mustard seed. You did it to Elijah. I'm giving you an out with a bird chirp. I need you to give me something, and that doesn't happen. If you're honest with yourself, you then need to adjust. Like, okay, 1 + 1 is supposed to equal 2. It didn't equal 2 here. Let's go back and see that, if you're honest with it.
Mm-hmm.
In the last couple of years, all these paths have collided to where I had to, and really life did it for me, but my idea of God had to be deconstructed because the pieces weren't fitting together, and it had to be honest with me. I had to treat it like science. That, like I said, we don't do bloodletting anymore. We don't do leeches. There's no lobotomies going on anymore that I know of. Because science has evolved. My relationship with my theology and my relationship with God, because I'm just saying theology in a way to relate to other people and a way to communicate it. Really, it's my relationship with God has changed. And it's like it has always been. It's just my relationship with God and how I understand it right now.
Yeah.
But it's definitely changed. It has left that house of Western theology. But I think we're still in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're at an hour and a half for the last time. You want to tell your story?
Yeah. So I think mine actually started probably, well, man, there was a period of time back in 2004 when I say that I was kicked out of church. I wasn't actually kicked out of church. I was kicked out of ministry. Which, just my personality and the way I'm built, like I am made to serve. Like that's just my nature, to encourage, to serve, to help.
You don't have to say the name of the church, but what kind of church were you going to? Like, Baptist. What was that tradition?
Baptist. They're independent, fundamental, Bible believing Baptist. Did you ever watch the documentary Shiny Happy People?
No.
Dude, it's good. It's depressing. But that's the environment. Like, so Bill Gothard, ATIA, lots of spiritual abuse. But anyway, so that's the church I grew up in from toddler up to my mid-20s. And then in about 2004, I had a conversation with the pastor about alcohol. And long story short, he said, well, if you can't counsel someone that drinking alcohol is sin, then you can't be involved in ministry, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward like a year or so. And
again, that's not in the Bible.
It's absurd. But for a guy like me who, like, the way that I express myself is by serving. Essentially what that did is that cut me off. That cut me out, cut my legs out from under me, because now I have no way of connecting with God, at least in my mind, or others, because that's how I do it, is by serving, in all of the different ministries. So when I was removed from that, I got to thinking, man, this whole thing is a scam.
Yeah.
Who's to say that Moses didn't just go up on the mountain and be like, okay, this is what we're going to tell him, and he created the 10 Commandments, or whatever. And so from there, I pretty quickly went to, well, if I do believe there's God, but I'm not convinced he's good. He may be evil, or he enjoys pain, or whatever. That was really the very first experience with deconstruction, but I'd come out of it. And then in 2000,
That's such an honest place, by the way.
what's that?
I believe in God, but like the honest feeling is, I don't know if he's good.
Yeah. So I think it was 2009 or maybe 11. I read Love Wins by Rob Bell.
Yeah.
And that was pretty monumental. And so I started questioning hell. Actually got removed from another church for my views on hell, or my questions about hell. And then kind of recently, within the past year or so, I just realized that the Bible is not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it was even intended to be what I thought it was. I don't think that it was intended to. Well, first off, I recognized that. Wait a second. This is the Jewish history. This is their history of how they related to God, and of course they're gonna be like the main stars of the story. Just like if the Bible were written in Texas would be God's chosen people. And so I started thinking about all that, and I'd read a few more books.
I remember when this is going on and having these conversations with you.
Yeah, out on West Kellogg, I think.
Yeah.
I read a couple other books. I don't remember what they were, but the one most recently that had the biggest impact was The Evolution of Adam by Peter Enns. And I still don't know what I think about evolution. Like, I just don't see how we came from a tadpole or whatever, but
You're holding on to some stuff, brother.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, like, I just don't care. I don't care how the electricity gets there. But what I realized, or what I learned, is that, oh, wait a second, there's all of these other cultures with with suspiciously similar stories, that then all of a sudden I realized, well, everybody's just trying to explain the way they see things. They're trying to explain their interactions with what they perceive to be God.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that what I was given was the Jewish interpretation.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of steps in between, but where I am now is, I think the Bible is a great book. I think it's full of wisdom. I think it's clearly a sacred book, but is it inerrant? I don't believe so. Is it infallible? I don't believe so. Is it God inspired? Well, in the sense that it's about God, but I don't believe that God wrote it. There were I had a couple other thoughts that are escaping me about the Bible specifically. But so once you lose that, once you pull that thread, well, now you kind of have to look at things in the big picture with honesty.
Yeah.
Because if I no longer have to make everything fit into this book, well, now I can start considering other perspectives, and even consider the fact that maybe this didn't happen.
Yeah.
Maybe it never happened, or maybe something similar happened, or maybe maybe the author is trying to describe something bigger. And so, like, I tell people, like, I do believe the Bible is true, but not in the sense that it's literally true, in the sense that it's telling a story of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And in that scenario, the creation story makes perfect sense. Like I can somewhat understand it, that it's talking about
Whoa.
how
Which creation story?
the first one,
Okay.
Genesis 2.
Two.
I can't remember.
Two is
Yeah.
the oldest one.
So essentially, you've got humanity, and they became aware or enlightened or conscious, and they realized that, hey, we're vulnerable here. We're naked, and they with that they lost their innocence, and so they were kicked out of Eden and all that kind of stuff. Like when you look at it as a story, when you look at it as an allegory or even a fable, then it makes a lot more sense.
Right.
And you no longer have to jam the pieces together, because now they stand alone. Like the story stands on its own.
Think of a child asking, "Mom, why do we have to work so hard? Why is life so
Yes.
tough?" She says, "It wasn't always this way. We used to be in a paradise. We used to be in a garden, and everything was perfect. But sin got us kicked out."
Yeah.
And
And so that, so one of the maybe more one of the, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. The concept of the devil, for example.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there's a being named Satan or a devil. I think that that's something that we created to try to explain temptation, to try to explain the feelings that we have when we don't measure up to our own standards.
Yeah.
I think that Satan is within us. It is
Right.
us. It's our psyche. And I can see that in Scripture now.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense. Like you look at Job, or
Right.
Job is actually a great example.
He's the perfect example.
That first off, I think it's allegorical. But second, God's not killing all of Job's kids because he had a bet with this other character named Satan.
If he
rather,
is, you got to question who's the good guy and bad guy in this.
For sure. You would not be, you could not be a good guy if I said, "Hey, Clayton, the only reason your kids love you is because you take care of them so well." And then you say, "You want to bet? I'm going to take away all their stuff, or I'm going to kill their siblings." That you wouldn't be a good dad. You wouldn't be a good guy. But to look at it in terms of, well, this is A, an allegory, but B, how we a lot of times have conversations ourselves with God.
Yes.
Like trying to figure out where we are, and trying to figure out how does God relate, and why does he relate, and all of this kind of stuff. But then, another big concept is the fact that God is the universe, and that God is a lot less of a person, a lot less of a individual, and a lot more of a force.
Yeah. Almost a law.
Yeah. I think it's because we're relational creatures. Like it's helpful to think of this force as being a somewhat of a person, or having relationships. But I think the reality is that there's a force out there. There's a vibration. There's a frequency. There's a whatever you want to call it. And that is God. That is what created us. That is what continues to create us. That is what provides. That's, when I pray now, I'm not praying to a person. I'm praying to the force. Like,
yes,
reach Clayton in Atlanta. And that can actually happen.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm appealing to this magical person. I'm appealing to the entire universe, which I think includes even past people, past lives, and everything that is, was, or could be in existence is part of it.
Well, and here's an idea, and like I said, it sounds kind of far out there. It sounds heretical, but I think it's actually one of the things the Bible was saying, and it's one of the things that many faiths say, is that God is actually in you. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
he's like a little light that flickers in your heart if you say a special prayer. It's deeper than that. And it
Yeah.
means whatever it means to you. But I think the faiths, all the faiths of the world say this, like the creation of Adam. The creation of Adam, God made him out of clay. He made him in a human shape, and then he breathed life into him. That is the same way you made an effigy of God, or you created a God in the Ugaritic tradition, which is what Judaism comes out of. Is you made God out of clay, out of mud, and then you baked him. You put up the attributes you wanted onto him, and then there was a ceremony where the life was breathed into him. The power, the Yahweh was breathed into him. That's how you made a God. I don't want to step on anybody's feelings, but what it seems like the Old Testament was pointing at, or at least hinting at, and I think this is maybe a deeper esoteric truth that is not surface level, is that when the divine council made man, they made him like a God. They made him like a small thing, a smaller version of God. Yeah, they made him, and I'm not saying we have magical superpowers, but I think another way to say that is everything you need from God, God already put in you. The journey is finding that and finding it out and establishing your relationship with God, which is the God in your heart, which is the God that comes out of your mouth, which is the fruits of the Spirit. That's this journey of my relationship with God is with the God which is the universe, but that universe is also in me. I'm a part of it.
Yep. You're a part of the universe. The universe is in you and you're in it. Just like the universe is in me and I'm in it. And we're both together.
Yeah.
And that's why like I like to say follow God wherever you find him.
Yeah.
If you find him in Hinduism, then by all means pursue him. If
Amen.
you find him in Christianity, pursue him. If you find him in Islam or anywhere, pursue him. But I think you have to be honest, and you have to actually pursue God, because somebody would say, well, what about if, think of some terrible cult. Like I'm not saying that every thought is true.
Right.
Every thought of God is true, but I am saying that God is the universe and that he presents himself, it's in different ways to different people at different times.
Well, just like you said, there is a dark part of each and every one of us. And part of that darkness is confusion. Part of that darkness is temptation. Are you with me? Okay, I didn't know if you froze. Part of that darkness, so part of the devil is in all of us. And man, sometimes we get confused and sometimes we lose our way. Sometimes people suffer from mental illness. Sometimes people, end up bad. I think they're still part of God, but also what's in them is the opposite of the light, the darkness. If there's a light, there can only be a light if there is a darkness. There can only be a darkness if there is a light, because they're the opposite of each other. And both of those things are in us. And that's where I don't know enough to really speak on it, but things like the Tao, and if you ever look up the Tao Te Ching, it's a Chinese philosophy. People would call it a religion, but it's just like Buddhism. It is not a religion. It's a theology, or it's a philosophy. There's no gods in it. Even if there is, there are ideas and metaphors. But the Tao is the opposite of dualism. So the Greco-Roman ideas, and after the exile of Babylon, what we call Judaism changed its tone a lot to reflect that dualistic idea. Scholars think that it wasn't a part of it before that. Taoism is all about balance, the yin yang. There's light and darkness in everything, and even the light has darkness in it, and even the darkness has light in it. and that finding your natural balance and your natural path, that's part of Taoism.
Yeah. Who is it that talked about the shadow self? Is that Jung?
Yeah, he talked about it a lot.
To me, that seemed like that's a great explanation for the devil.
Yeah.
You know, we've all got it. We all struggle with it. And I think that ultimately our goal is to, I'm going to say enlightened, but that sounds kind of high-minded. I think that is the goal, though, is to become more selfless, to become less, maybe to deal with our ego or to deal with ourselves. I guess I'm still working on that, still trying to figure that part out, but it's all God.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
all God.
I think that it's all God. And so
Sound like Ram Dass, baby.
and so like I even find myself using a lot of the same terminology that I used to use, but now it means something completely different. And now it makes sense.
Yes. And now I can use this dang tool in a way that's actually beneficial.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned with historic Judaism that really kind of threw me for a loop was when I learned that Judaism wasn't the first religion.
Like
And
every religion, it came from something before it.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say it because I consider myself a smart guy, but I'd never been presented with that. And so I assumed that, well, Judaism was the first religion because obviously God created man. And so like Adam would have been a Jew. And so that was the beginning. It didn't take too much research. It just actually took looking to find out, oh, actually, no, it wasn't. Hinduism was, I think, 1,000 years before Judaism.
Yeah.
And then come to find out that Christianity was a cult of Judaism.
Yeah, dude.
And it's all like, what?
A drug cult at one point.
How did I was never presented with this information.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You can't know, you can't be judged on what you don't know. And you can't judge people. Like, these are some fundamental, foundational, destroying ideas that we're tossing around pretty lightly. But you can't blame someone if they're not ready to jump on board with you. If they're not ready, like, if someone's not ready to accept this, I know for 40 years I ignored a lot of this.
Well, and I think this is the great part, is that I don't think you have to. I don't think you should.
Exactly.
If you do, then pursue God wherever you find him. But if you don't feel a call to jump on the bandwagon, then by all means, stay where you are. I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe not perfect. I think it's great for you to pursue God in Christianity.
Yeah.
If you're in Islam, then I think it's great. Pursue God in Islam. But if in either scenario you find this doesn't add up, then keep looking, keep pursuing, because it could be that the universe is whispering to you, I want to show you something else. I want to show you something different. I want to show you a different picture. I look at it like, and I know I've said this to you, I don't know if I've said it on here, that it's kind of like looking at a cloud.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I see a giraffe, and from someone else's perspective, they see an elephant or a monkey or a hippo or whatever. But we're all just trying to describe what we see, what we think we see.
Yeah.
And someone would say, well, the difference though is that God is like, there is a specific thing. And so, like, let's say that it is an elephant. Just because you call it a monkey doesn't mean it's a monkey. It's still an elephant.
Yeah.
But I think that God is so much bigger than that.
What's crazy about that, and I think you and I have both been in the position of authority to say, like, well, actually, there is a God, and actually, he is these things. I think you and I have both said that in the past. Is it takes such wild arrogance, dude, to such unbelievable. Like, actually, I have the entire universe figured out.
So when I was a kid, I'll bet I was probably 10 years old, maybe younger, but it was around 10 years old. On Thursday nights, we would do visitation, is what we would call it,
Uh-huh.
where we would go door to door with tracts
Yeah.
that said, do you know where you will, if you die today, do you know where you will spend eternity? And so we would knock on, I'm a kid
Yeah.
knocking on doors.
Arrogant
my name
little
is
shit.
my name is Justin with such and such church. If you were to die today, do you know where you would spend eternity? No matter what the answer was, if they didn't already come to my church, my job or my goal was to convince them, to show them that they're going to hell. As
I
a
need to write
kid,
this timestamp down. I want this to be like a short. That what you
As-
just said. It's one of my favorite stories.
as a child, and I can't even imagine some kid coming up to my door today telling me that I'm going to hell because, for whatever reason, because I don't go to the right church or because I don't have the right answers. But that's the same arrogance. That's the same arrogance I think we have when we say, well, this is what God is, and this is what the Bible means, and all this kind of stuff. Come on, man, you don't know.
Yeah.
You weren't there, neither was I.
And I think one of the things that helped us along, or definitely was a part of it, whether we recognized it or not, was our exit from law enforcement. Because I'm going to turn the slide off now. I think it's right. We both, as part of the job, we spoke with so much authority of what the law was. You broke this law, so now turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're going to go to jail. Don't fight me or there's going to be consequences. Like we were the position of authority. Upon our exit from law enforcement, and we can talk about this some other time, but our ideas shifted from that authority. Like, hey man, maybe some of the things I thought about, and we talked about some of that actually last week, but maybe some of the things that I thought about substances or personal freedom doesn't exactly line up with where I am now. My idea on personal autonomy has changed since I was a cop.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. Last night when we were standing in line for the concert, everybody was smoking weed, and my wife was like, "Oh, that stinks," and I was like, "It smells like freedom."
Yeah. That's what another thing. I think that's why libertarians is so appealing, because like in the libertarian mindset, I want there to be two dudes kissing in the background. I want there to be AR-15s everywhere. I want there to be some blow on the table, and I want a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, and everyone, and a Hindu, and a rainbow over everything. That's my perfect world.
I'm a little surprised you said cocaine on the table, and
I didn't say I'm going to
marijuana.
be taking it. I just said I want it to be there.
Well, I'm just saying that I think the typical argument would be marijuana or something like that. But I mean, cocaine's fine too. But,
hey, that grows like grass in this world, in this utopia.
Yeah. But I still, at the end of the day, I still go to an evangelical church, and I am actively involved. And I don't think it's hypocritical. I don't think that it's. I just think that it is true. Christianity is true, just not literal.
So one of the things why I said at the beginning this was related. These two seemingly topics that have nothing to do with each other is related. One of the tools in my toolbox is the rosary. I've never been Catholic in my life. Some of my best friends from high school, Caitlin and Cassandra, they were Catholics. They were my first real exposure to Catholicism, or my buddies in high school. But the rosary is there's so much in the rosary that can snap you out of a funk, that can snap you out of the blues. It does so much. It is, by the way, ancient Christian churches and ancient Jewish temples are both found with burnt marijuana or burnt cannabis in their temples. The the first century all the way up to like the 5th century church, or maybe up until the first 1,000 years, they used to burn, among many things, cannabis in that incense swinger that they swing in Catholic churches. So that's part of this picture, just because think about the historical Christian church used to be high as a fucking kite every Sunday. They were blazed up. Then they would think about this. They were all high. None of them could read. The only authority came from this holy man in these funny clothes. They chanted in Latin. Most of the churches back then didn't, or most of the people didn't speak Latin. Latin was already a dead language, but they chanted in Latin, sang songs in Latin, spoke in these other tongues, high as a kite, the room's filled with smoke.
Sounds like a real party.
Sounds like it fucking rocks. And there's a guy with this badass hat, like that's this high up at the top, speaking to you, and you get plunged into water to signify your old body being dead and you're born again into this new life. The church was trippy. Gosh dang, I was on a roll. We just hit 2 hours and I lost my thought. What was I talking about?
You're talking about how ancient Christianity and Catholicism used cannabis.
The rosary. One of the things I use about one of my tools is snapping myself out. Is the rosary. And I'm not on cannabis right now, by the way.
I know, just because you're wearing your see-through glasses.
What? Excuse me? But it's also it's an obvious form of meditation. Hinduism and Buddhism and Hinduism. Did I say Hinduism? Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, ancient Kabbalah, like which Kabbalah is a magic in Judaism that Judaism just doesn't talk about. They have like their own sorcery cult.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. They all have these necklaces that they pray and meditate on.
Voodoo probably has it.
Voodoo has it. Hoodoo does. Has these necklaces that they say these mantras like the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Next speed. Hail Mary. And you get on this cycle and you enter the Buddha mind, is what Buddhism would call the Buddha mind. You lose your identity if you can, especially, like I said, thinking about those first to 10th century churches. They're all blazing it up. You lose your mind in the Christ mind. All you're thinking about is, our Father who art in heaven, holy is your name. And you're envisioning these words, you're feeling it. Christianity already has so much. It already has so much for us there. Like I said, I don't think it's the end all be all, but there's things that are in Christianity that we don't talk about in Western evangelicalism in 2024 that's still there for you to take it, man. Like, I'm not going to get into the legalities of your state, but even besides that, if you treat the rosary or if you treat prayer as a mindfulness exercise, like lose yourself, you're going to get the same benefits. And that's not talked about in Sunday school in most churches. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's parts of, that's why I'm still a Christian, brother. That's why I'm still in the club. There's parts of Christianity that's for us, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you. I'll tell you though, since we are 2 hours, I'm gonna wrap it up. Any parting thoughts?
No, I'm glad we talked. I think we did a good job talking about this. I'll probably do this 2 episodes. I'll throw this in at the beginning, and I'll add on to some other stuff. But we're on Spotify now. Subscribe.
I saw that.
Subscribe to us on Spotify. You can share it on all the socials on Spotify. We're our YouTube channel's picking up. Like, subscribe, comment on YouTube. Ask, I think we would be interactive right now with.
I'd love to interact with some either people that disagree or do agree, or that have experienced something similar, or maybe even something that we haven't even considered yet. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. And we've done a version of that on our first couple of comments. We have responded to in past episodes, so we're down for it. I like this. I think this is a creative, like this is a part of me that gets out that creative energy that I have, and it helps me work through these ideas.
Yep, I'm the same.
And hopefully people enjoy it.
Yeah.
And as always, this week's episode was brought to you by Steadfast Real Estate Group of Heritage First Realty in Wichita, Kansas. Visit them online at Steadfast, that's STEADFAST, ICT.com, steadfastict.com, or call them at area code 316-461-2806 for all your home buying needs in Wichita, the Wichita area of Kansas. For all your home buying needs in northeast Georgia, or really all in North Georgia, give me a call. I'm Clayton Blackwood. I'm part of the Hester Group, and we're under Harry Norman Realty. Give me a call at area code 316-409-7907, or visit my website at claytonblackwood.harrynorman.com. Clayton Blackwood is one word, and Harry Norman is one word. You know how the internet works. If you are in the Wichita area and you need a tub painted, call my buddy Jed and his life partner Alex at H&L Resurfacing. Their phone number is area code 316-209-4674. They're both Marine Corps veterans, and that is a locally owned business. They have a track record of success. Okay, next week, or probably in a couple of days, we're going to pick up in a new episode. See you guys then. Love you. Bye.